Without any further ado, let's jump in. So Gatsby Themes, the power behind Emulsify Style Guide. Here's a picture of my face. My name is Evan Wilhite. I'm a senior front-end engineer at Four Kitchens. I live in the Nashville-ish, Tennessee area, live outside of Nashville, and I am project lead on the Emulsify project. If you are new to the Emulsify project, Emulsify is an open source tool for creating design systems with reusable components and clear guidelines for teams. All right, so what are we going to cover in this session? So from the technology side, we're going to be covering Gatsby, of course, and specifically themes, the Gatsby theme system, as well as the theme UI design graph framework, which is a separate thing from Gatsby. Those are the sort of technology stack pieces that we're going to talk about a lot in this session. And then in terms of what you will leave here knowing how to do today, we will cover how we use those two technologies to build the Emulsify Style Guide, which is a style guide generator. And you will learn how you can create a customized style guide using the generator, but also how you could use Gatsby Themes and Theme UI to build your own projects, not just the style guide that we're going to be talking about. So first, let's talk a little bit about the technologies. So if you are new to this, which you probably are not if you're coming to this conference, but Gatsby real quick we'll cover is a free and open source framework. It's based on React. Helps developers build blazing fast static websites and applications. So even though it is a static site generator, it has a really impressive build chain, allowing you to quickly get started developing locally, deploying remotely. It also has a very powerful development API and tools to build complex functionality, including an extensive hooks system. And finally, it has a rich plugin ecosystem to meet a variety of needs. So speaking of those plugins, let's talk about plugins for a minute. So to understand Gatsby themes well, we first need to understand Gatsby plugins. So this is Gatsby's definition of plugins, which is pseudo helpful. Gatsby plugins are Node.js packages that implement Gatsby APIs. For larger, more complex sites, plugins let you modularize your site customizations into site-specific plugins. So hopefully you kind of got that picture again if you're new to this, but we're kind of used to this thing, right? So if you're coming from Drupal or WordPress or anything like that, this is like modules or plugins, pieces that you can sort of separate out that exist on their own and you can plug them in to fit a certain functionality on the project. So let's look at some examples of Gatsby plugins. So we have Gatsby plugin TypeScript. So this adds TypeScript support to your project. And this is kind of just a random picking of things from the Gatsby plugin system to give you an idea. React Helmet. So this is the ability to control the head of your project easily and flexibly. This is a React piece of functionality outside of Gatsby that this plugin allows you to use. And then source file system. So Gatsby can pull content from a variety of sources. And this is the plugin that sources that content into files. You can also use a variety of transformers to convert the data that you're pulling in into files so this plugin can then use them. So for example, we're going to be looking at Markdown today, and you can use the transformer remark, and that will convert that data into files, and then this source file system will use that to parse those files and create pages on the website. Hopefully you can see just with those three that there's a lot of power behind this technology in Gatsby. So it is a static site generator, but it's obviously a lot more than that. It can handle really complex things and has a rich ecosystem. So specifically for this session, what is a Gatsby theme then? So from Gatsby again, let's read the definition. The definition of a theme is a type of plugin that includes a Gatsby-config file and adds pre-configured functionality, data sourcing, and/or UI code to Gatsby sites. So this is an interesting definition. We don't need to breeze past it, because notice the definition is not this, a thing you add to your site to make it look nice. You know, that's kind of what we think of when we think of the word themes, at least on the front end side. From my background, when I see the word theme, I make some assumptions. This is a lot more powerful than that. So let's take a look at some examples. The first two here, Gatsby Theme Blog and Gatsby Theme Notes, these provide some minimal user interface, but more importantly, they're providing the content types and the functionality to build these two kinds of content in your site. So blog entries and notes. And also you can use these together on a project if you need both. So if you need to support both blog entries and notes, you can use both of these themes like plugins to add not only the functionality, but some UI to deliver those things quickly. So not only is this a flexible system, it's a composable system. And then of course, notice you have more traditional themes like Material UI that actually do define some user interface elements for you. So themes can span a broad range of capabilities, and that's the picture that I want you to get from that. So possibly the most important thing to realize about Gatsby themes is what they are not. Gatsby has supported the concept of starters for a long time, but here are the two keys of starters. Starters are essentially sites that have been ejected from the Gatsby let me say that differently. I said that in a confusing way. Sites created from a traditional starter have basically been ejected from the starter. So when you pull down a starter and you use that and you start writing your project, if you're from the Drupal landscape, people use starter kit for this word because it means you're going to take that thing, you're going to make it your own, you're going to use it. But as you can see, as you can imagine, that means that you've diverged the code. So there's no easy way to just pull in upstream updates from that. Essentially, you've kind of created a fork. And if you've created multiple sites using this same starter, there's no easy way to update all of those sites. So it's important to understand this distinction between starters and themes, because this is core to the power of Gatsby Theme Emulsify and Gatsby themes in general, which is that you can scaffold functionality and or UI that can then be used on a project in a maintainable way, similar to a module or plugin. So it can be updated across many projects, that sort of thing. So now that we have some background, let's take a look at Gatsby Theme Emulsify specifically, which, as you can see in the short description in the Gatsby plugins section here, that it's a style guide generator using MDX and Theme UI, and we're going to talk about those. It reads your documentation that you create and your component library and generates a style guide from those things. So let's dive into the code here. So Gatsby Theme Emulsify, like all Gatsby themes, if you remember from the definition, is a package. So you can go directly to the Gatsby plugin page or the NPM page, which I'm showing here. But if you are looking to set up your first style guide, I would actually recommend going to our Workspace package on GitHub. So Gatsby recommends Yarn workspaces, which we're not going to cover here and you don't need to understand here, but I'm going to explain for a couple of reasons because it'll be helpful to approach it if you're not used to that technology, you're not already used to using it. Gatsby recommends it for a couple of reasons. The first is that the theme itself, because it's a plugin, it's not a Gatsby site. So you can't just install that and run it like it's a Gatsby site. It's meant to be installed into an existing project and run like a modular plugin. And then because this is a workspace, we can contain the code for that for Gatsby Theme Emulsify, so you can actually kind of parse through the code and look at it. But we can also contain an example site for you, which is essentially a starter kit. I wouldn't recommend this one because it's what we've done with our examples. We've shown just a whole host of things that you can do in the project. You could use it as a starter kit, but it's the kind of thing where you'll probably be removing a lot of content and making it your own. But you can see what I'm talking about in this on this workspace page here. We've got Gatsby Theme Emulsify, which is our actual theme. That's our plugin. And then right beside it, we've got a directory called example, which is going to be an example Gatsby site. And then because it's a workspace, if you want to read through the README to run this, there's some kind of nice workflow things. So you can just run, for instance, yarn develop from the root if you downloaded this project, and it would automatically run Gatsby develop on the example site and show you what that looks like in a browser. So speaking of that, I'm going to change what I'm sharing here. Give me just a second. And I'm going to share my screen 2 over here. So this is what the example site looks like from what we just talked about. So this is an example site that we've built from the style guide. This contains no theming override. So this is the default sort of theme that you get. It's very basic. It's meant to be styled to meet your needs, obviously. And it contains example pages, example components, all of that sort of thing. So I'm just going to navigate through this for a minute. So you can see we're at a home page. I'm navigating to an installation and usage page. You can see we've populated it with links. It has the ability to document code. It has this kind of contrasted background section, so it has some things that you can do to break up content. These are just, again, example pages we created. This is an example page of just Markdown's capabilities in general of producing content. These are some component pages. So now we're getting into examples of how to not only document code, but this button that is in this page is actually being pulled from a Storybook instance. And we're going to talk about that as we go through this. But now we're documenting a live component from your component library. And here's another component. And you can see we've documented this one differently, where we have the component, which is this call to action up here. That's being, again, pulled from Storybook. And then we have some content, and then we have our code viewer. So you can really kind of lay these things out however you want. That's what we're showing with that page. And then you may have noticed at the top we have some tabs. So you can actually create pages that show up in the left sidebar menu, and then you can create tabs and sections using Markdown, and we'll talk about that too. And then we have a dark and light theme as well. So we have the idea of color modes built into this. All right, so let me jump back. We're going to be doing a little bit of this, by the way. I'm going to go back and forth from the presentation. So it just is what it is. All right, so let me make sure. All right, we're back on the presentation. So let's talk about a little bit about the ingredients of this style guide that we've looked at. So the first one is that we use MDX, which, if you're new to MDX, is basically Markdown with superpowers. You write JSX, you can write JSX components. You can write just Markdown, obviously, but you can also write JSX components in it. So you can imagine the power of just that alone. You can do things in it or provide functionality to it, essentially as if it's not only a form of documentation, but something that you can actually write code into to do things. And we'll show examples of that here in a second. And then also there's built-in navigation. So you noticed on the left, kind of left sidebar, that there's built-in navigation. So basically the pages and components that you add automatically populate a menu. So you just create those pages, create those components, and then the navigation is built for you. There's also the concept of a Storybook component viewer. So this, you can tell your style guide where your Storybook instance lives. And then you can just write a simple, what they call short code, which is basically a small component syntax style, and reference that Storybook component, which every Storybook component has its own ID. This is all in our documentation, by the way. So you tell it where your Storybook instance lives, and then wherever you want to stick a Storybook component, you just put in that ID, and it shows that component on the page. So we have that functionality built in. Also, you already saw we have syntax highlighting using Prism.js. That's what powers that. It's very powerful. It's very flexible. You can use, there's a multitude of like themes or whatever they call them in Prism.js to change the look and feel of that. So you can use all of those and change that on your project. Also, there's a concept of a multiple design system navigation, which I actually did not show this. I meant to, but there's an off-screen navigation near the logo at the top that you can toggle in. And basically this is for if you have multiple style guides or if you have just other things you need to link to. It's functionality that we ran into with client projects where you might need to link to other style guides or just other things that are helpful for the organization. This is kind of, the style guide is, you know, if you're familiar with our other presentations on Emulsify topics, you know that it's for that top level audience. It speaks to everyone, not just the production team. So content strategy reads from it, even marketing teams and C-levels read from it. Everybody is sort of geared and consolidated around this thing. It's sort of the litmus for how to create everything for the web projects or even print projects for your brand. So the style guide is really this central hub for all of that. So that off-screen navigation can be helpful to link to other things. And then also we have the concept of tabs. So I don't know if you noticed this, but in the code viewer, there's kind of a default view to view the code for the component, but we have these tab links where you can link off. So if you have storybook components in multiple languages, you can actually provide the basic language that is the authoritative one, and then you can link off to as many as you want in sort of a nice tab viewer. We got that idea directly from Carbon Design System, which is IBM's excellent design system. And then special components. So we have not only the storybook component that's like a special component that we built that you can use in your Markdown files, but we also have the contrast wrapper, which you may have noticed on the other page when I was scrolling through. It just puts it on a contrasted background to break up content. And then the tab links, like I just mentioned. And then finally, we have the tab pages. So you can not only put pages in the navigation, but you can break each page, and not just component pages, but any page up into tabs to break up sort of how the flow of reading the style guide goes. All right, so let's talk about creating a style guide. So let's look at how to install our own style guide from scratch. This is going to help us understand the concept of using a Gatsby theme. So I'm going to jump out of sharing this and share my screen one more time. So we're actually going to walk through the process of creating our own style guide here. So in the slides, which by the way, I meant to mention this at the beginning, the slide link is at the top of the chat. I actually have made the slides public so you can go through and look at those yourself. But here I'm just going to make a directory, our new style guide, and let's cd into that. And then let's do yarn init. You can use NPM, obviously. And I'm just going to cycle through this. This is going to create our package.json. So we're literally starting a project from scratch here. It's going to guide you through sort of what it looks like to install a Gatsby theme, how fast it gets you from 0 to a Gatsby site. So our next step is to add Gatsby, but we want to add the theme as well. So I'm going to do yarn add Gatsby and Gatsby theme Emulsify. And then while that's installing, I'm actually going to go over and grab a file that we're going to need. You could write this file from scratch, but it's you'll notice in our documentation, which I'll link to at the end of this presentation, by the way, that it talks about going over and looking at the example theme. So this is our Gatsby Theme Emulsify Workspace. And I'm going to go into the example theme, and I'm going to grab the contents of Gatsby-config. So if you're familiar with Gatsby projects, this is sort of the heart of the Gatsby project. It defines global things for it, global configuration for it. So it looks like we're done over here with the installation. I'm going to open this up in my code viewer, and I'm going to add this file, Gatsby-config.js. And so I've pasted in the contents from this file. So basically what we need to do to set up our project is we have a different name, so I'm just going to put it in here on our new style guide. This path prefix up here is unique as well, but it's really only needed if you are going to be deploying to GitHub pages. This is for the deploy command that we have built in. To deploy to GitHub pages, this will prefix it. So if you're used to having hosting things on GitHub, you know, it does github.io/ the name of the repo. So that's what that's for. So I'll just go ahead and change it, but it's not really important for what we're talking about today. Now my code viewer's acting weird. Oh, I got rid of my, there we go. And then everything else in here, I'm going to leave the same. So we can define the path to our style guide pages. We can define the path to our components, but I'm just going to leave those at the defaults, which are style guide and components. And then we have, as you saw in the demonstration, we have our own storybook instance that just shows the two example components that we need. So I'm going to leave that the same for our purposes. But obviously, that's where you'll want to change to show your storybook instance. So I'm going to save this file. And now we are to creating the style guide directory and the components directory. So for speed's sake, I'm just going to copy these over from an existing project that I already have set up over here. So I'm going to go over to this style guide directory, and I'm just going to copy and paste it. So there's our style guide directory. I'll show you the contents of that in just a second. And our components directory. And the reason we separate those out is because what we found on projects is that components really can live in a number of places. Some people like to document their components right alongside them, which, as you can imagine, would not be in the style guide. It would be in a project somewhere or in a shared repo somewhere where it's just those components. We're going to put ours here for simplicity's sake, but that's why we break those out, because you can really document your components anywhere. And then in this Gatsby config file, you can call that as a dependency. So you've installed that dependency wherever they're coming from, and then direct your Gatsby site to read the files from there. But for our sake, for right now, we have a style guide directory. By default, you have to have a few files in here. You have to have an index file and a 404 file. Those are things that Gatsby expects. Again, because we're using Markdown and MDX, those are just Markdown files. So we have an index.md file, 404.md, and then we have just a fake directory that we've set up with one page in it. And then we have our components directory, which is a little bit unique. Because we pull component documentation from somewhere else, we actually don't need our documentation in here. But to order it, we have it set up so that basically you just add the directory in wherever the order. It's going to order by this number or by alphabetical if you choose to do so. So we're going to have first directory is going to be listed first, and then components in the navigation. And then I just have a blank file in here. And this just tells Gatsby Theme Emulsify that you're going to have a components directory, but it's not going to pull any data from this file that's in here. So we have those created. And then we're going to add some scripts, and then we can actually just run with it. I have to pull my scripts up here. Oh, I'm actually not going to pull those from my slides. I'm going to pull them from here. So I'm going to throw some scripts in my package.json here. The scripts are just the develop script, which is all we're going to use now, Gatsby build script, which comes as a default with Gatsby, and then a deploy style guide script, which we're not going to use, but it's kind of default in the theme, so I added it. And we should be done. We should be able to actually run this project now. So I'm going to run yarn develop, which is going to run Gatsby develop. And let's see what happens. We should be getting close here. Looks like screen sharing is slowing things down a bit. Okay, so now here we have our project we've just set up. It's pulling in all the goodness of Gatsby Theme Emulsify, and we've really just taken a few steps. That's what I wanted to show. We've decided what our style guide contents are going to be. We've decided what our components directory is going to be, and we've populated the Gatsby config file correctly, and then we automatically get this. So you can see here's our directory in our first page, and here's our components directory with the button and the CTA. That's the directory that I pulled over, has both of those in it. By the way, here's the off-screen navigation that I was referring to earlier, if you need to have that to link to other things. So that's it. I'm going to jump back to the presentation, and we're going to talk a little bit about theming. All right. So let's talk about theming the style guide. So theme UI. And theme UI is confusing from a terminology standpoint. It sounds like just two words thrown together, but it's actually a thing. It's at theme-ui.com. And how they define it is a little bit heady because the project is capable of a lot of things. It's a little bit meta of a project. And we'll break down the things that are important for our understanding, but they define it as a library of creating themable user interfaces based on constraint-based design principles. So I'm actually going to break down what that means for me, at least. The first thing to understand about theme UI is that it's configuration-based. So what does that mean? So here's some example of the config file from a project using theme UI. And so you can see in this, we're exporting theme configuration in a file format. So we have this config that says, you know, here's a object called colors. It has text in it. Text is set to this value. Background is set to that value. Here are fonts. Body is set to this value. So it's configuration based. And I'm not going to go into the depths of this. You can read through their documentation how you actually write this. It's fairly similar to how you write styling in React in general. But it's over in this separate file. And the reason that's important is, well, let's jump into the next part of this. I don't want to jump ahead. So basically, you can style your project using those config values. So here's an example of the styling in use. So you see here we, in the SX prop, the color and the font family of this H1 are being set to properties that were defined in that config file. So we're setting color to primary and font family to heading. So if I go back to this file, you can see there's a color called primary, which is set to tomato, and a font family called heading. So it's going to apply those styles to that React component over there. So this is the this is the most important part to understand about Theme UI, is that it separates this out into configuration. It does contain a lot more than that as well, though. It contains the ability to style MDX via that configuration. This is obviously important in our scenario because not only do you have the ability to style those React components, but you have the ability to say all of the markdown that a user is going to add on a page for the H2s and the paragraphs and whatever, those are styled like this. And again, that lives over in that config. So the config controls that. It also supports color modes out of the box, which is what we use for our light and dark mode in Gatsby Theme Emulsify, but you can add more. And it also comes with a powerful API of its own, as well as a set of default components, which we sort of minimally used. But if you're looking at this project to use on your own Gatsby project or something separate, I highly recommend looking through it. It's a really powerful tool to sort of get you started quickly. And where it really shows its power is when you need something to be extendable. So you have one project built a certain way, but you also have other projects that you want to share code across. And obviously in our scenario, this is important. So let's look at how we would use the power of Theme UI to theme our own project. So again, I'm going to jump out of my slides here. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is over here in our project we've created, I'm going to create a new folder, and it is called Source, and then Gatsby Plugin Theme UI. And then inside of that file, or inside of that folder, I mean, we're going to have an index.js file. And this is where we're going to define our config for our project. And I'm going to go over here and pull the contents. Actually, I'm going to go over here. So I'm going to my workspace. I'm going to pull the contents from the example project because it'll, you'll see why in a second. So our example project has this code in it. And let's take a look at it over here in the code editor. All right, so what this says is go to the theme and go to the theme UI file that's set in the theme that defines all of this configuration the first time and import all of that. And then in this export default, I'm saying spread all of that. That's a spread property there. So basically pull in essentially all of that config. And so I'm going to restart. I actually learned that you have to restart Yarn Develop when you add this. So I'm going to restart that real quick. And then underneath this is where we can define our config for our project. So hopefully you're starting to see where the power of this would come in, because we need a way to have a default theme, right? Because we want a style guide that you can quickly run with. But we need to be able to override. One of the things that we wanted to do with this project from the beginning was to make it as flexible as possible to cover a wide variety of scenarios, because a style guide and the way it is used has to be really highly designed. It is usually designed really strongly to the brand and very polished. It's different than a component library that serves kind of one purpose. This is a very polished website that you want to really put your stamp on. It doesn't need to look, like the gray thing that I showed you before. And I'm just going to quickly show you, I'm going to copy bits and pieces from another file where I've already played with this. So here's our default. So let's go back and look. I'm just going to refresh to show you this is obviously what it still looks like because we haven't defined anything differently. I'm going to go pull over some colors that I've done in a separate project just to speed us up. And so you can see that our automatically changed a bunch of things for better or worse. But it just showing you quickly how changing a few things. So not only am I now spreading the theme, but I'm spreading the colors as well. So there's a lot of colors defined in our parent theme because there's a lot of different things that you can change. It just gives you more power to sort of control things more specifically. But what we're saying here is we want all of that, but we want to change these 4 things. We want to change text to block, background to this EF, 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 etc. Excuse me, I'm going to take a drink of water. So that's what we've done with the colors. Let's keep pulling things on. So here I'm going to pull in some heading styles. We should see some changes here. So this is an interesting one. So we've grabbed some things from the headings file, but that includes hero. We're importing everything in hero, but instead of just a color background, we're actually importing an image. So we're setting a background image. And you notice this is just CSS that we're using in here. So if I do, let's change this to 700, 1200 by 400. And center. Should see this image change pretty drastically. I think I broke something. 1200, 400. What did I do? Just change one thing. Oh, there, it just took a while to load. So here's our file. It's got a blur apply, but you can see it's a background image. It looks terrible, but ignore that because it's just the file that I've pulled in for this purpose isn't a very good file. But you can see how quickly the concept, you can see how quickly you could apply this to where you can really change a lot of things in the background very easily, like colors, images. You can very quickly change padding, margins, how large the sidebar is, how large the heading is, what the content well looks like. All of these things can be changed through this config file. So this is the power of this config because we're still, remember, we're still not into territory where we're ejected from the theme. We can still update the theme as much as we want. If there's security updates, if there's new features, we can pull those in. But this config file is controlling these things. So we're not actually, again, we're not actually like going against the theme to where now we're in a situation where we can't keep updating it. So real quickly, because we're running out of time, I'm just going to copy the rest of this because it makes it look halfway decent. These are just some other things that I overrode on this example. But here we have our navigation defined. It's dark now. We have our content well that looks different. So yeah, this is just an example to show you how quickly you can go through and change things in that config format. You can also write new things in there based on the style. So again, I can't do a deep dive into Theme UI, but go look through their documentation to learn how we've used that and how they recommend writing that on projects. All right, so let's talk about one more thing, and then we'll get into Q&A. I'm going to change back to my slides real quick. All right, let's talk about shadowing. So the config controls an enormous amount of the project. But if you remember what I just said about this needing to be extremely flexible, as you can imagine, you might hit walls with the config if you're talking about extreme flexibility. So Gatsby Themes have this idea of shadowing built in. And let's look at an example of that. So if this is something that's new to you, I'm going to talk through this example really briefly, and then I'm going to talk about the upsides and the downsides of shadowing. But basically, you can pull any file from the parent theme, and you can match the path in your your source directory, so your local project, create a source directory, which is common in a Gatsby project anyways. And then what you do with the path is you find the path to that file in the original theme, and it's /source/ the theme name, and then the rest of the path. So here's an example here of the button from our theme. The button is at source/components, and then the rest of that path you can read there. In our theme, what that would become is source/ the name of the theme, which is Gatsby Theme Emulsify, and then the rest of that path. So components, atoms, buttons, button.component.js. And what that does is Gatsby now reads that file as the authoritative button file. So as you can imagine, this is taking the control to an extreme. This would allow you to write your own navigation. This would allow you to write your own content well. So it's an enormous amount of power. So that's the upside. The upside is that there truly is extreme flexibility because of Gatsby themes and because of shadowing. But let me talk about the downside for a second. The reason we have done so much with Theme UI is because shadowing is kind of like a hammer. For that button file that you've just written, you've basically ejected it now. So you're writing your own button file. So any changes to the button file in the theme are not going to be pulled in the future for you. So again, really powerful, but do it purposefully, I guess is what I'm trying to get at on that. All right. So now that I've walked through all of that, the good news is I wanted to walk through how to do all of that. But if you just need to get started with a style guide, we've actually created a Gatsby starter that contains exactly what I've just shown you today, minus the theming changes we made. So it comes with the files and folders already in place, the style guide directory, an example page in that directory, the components directory, comes with the Gatsby config file pre-populated to just kind of write what you need. It's the perfect example of what a starter should be, because you take that starter and you create whatever you want from it. You hit the ground running. But the Gatsby theme, again, can be updated over time. So it's a starter kit. That, by the way, is still in progress in being, it's ready to use, but it's still in progress in being accepted into the Gatsby starter ecosystem, because we just made it recently. Pretty soon it will show up if you go to Gatsby js.org, I think it is their website. You'll find that in the starters section. So what's next for the Gatsby theme Emulsify? We're obviously interested in different content sources. It supports Markdown and MDX by default, which is really powerful. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of clients who would love to be able to use CMSs for this content. So we're interested in building the functionality to allow for different content sources. That's top on our list. It's what we're looking towards next. We've also had some interest in search, so being able to search through your Gatsby style guide, which Gatsby has multiple search plugins, so we'll be able to lean on those. And then, of course, more theme UI control over time. We would like to put as much as possible into that theme UI so that you can really create your own very custom style guide without sort of ejecting those components. And then documentation, we have a brand new docs website that is up, docs.emulsify.info. We are keeping this up to date. It's also open source, so you can, it uses Gitbook, so you can make PRs against it and changes and recommendations or anything like that to ask for certain pages to be documented. That docs page contains sections not only on what we've walked through today on how to create a style guide, but it also contains an enormous amount of documentation on how to write for your style guide. So how to write those components that I talked about, how to create different kinds of style guide pages and different things like that. Excuse me. And that brings us to the end. So yeah, I'm ready for Q&A.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can.
Excellent. Yeah, Carlos. So Theme UI is new for me. I've seen it everywhere in this convention. You use style components to style? If yes, is there a theme UI? Is theme UI not the same thing as styled comp themes, or are those totally different approaches?
Oh man, I wish I knew the answer to this question, Carlos. I'm pretty sure Theme UI talks about this on their website. I know they were influenced by an existing project out there, and it may have actually been style components, but don't take me at that answer. So if you were using Theme UI on your own, much of what I've shown today is sort of that configuration because it's specific to Emulsify style guide. But if you were using Theme UI on your own, what's cool is actually that little snippet that I showed at the beginning, which is where you define in your config the things that you want to be or the things that you want to reuse across the entire project. And then when you're making components, you just reference those. So for me, it was a natural sort of logical extension coming from like Sass variables or CSS custom properties, mixins, coming from this world where you try and smartly create the global things somewhere and make those easily readable as well, which a config file is easily readable, and then use them everywhere. Sorry, I know that was not a direct answer to your question, but I apologize. I don't know the direct answer. Hopefully that helped.
All right. Alex has a question. I like how Theme UI has live edit while browsing their components. I didn't see an add-on in Storybook that had such features, so I'm still looking for the best options on how users could quickly change options like Storybook knobs to play around with Theme UI variants or recipes containing a collection of components. Any thoughts on this? How do you do this in Emulsify, or are there future plans for this?
Yeah, this is really an intriguing topic. And again, I'm not going to give a full answer to this because I don't know that I'm capable of it, but I will tell you what I am interested in personally. Storybook 6.0 just came out, which I'm sure a lot of people are talking about at this conference if they're talking about Storybook. And it has, basically they've rewritten knobs and their core in Storybook, and it's really, really powerful. If you're familiar with Storybook, you know that they also have a docs section, which is a really powerful, basically style guide built into Storybook. And the reason we don't use that is because it's still in their UI. We needed something that was going to live outside of that UI. But I am really personally interested in either leveraging that from Storybook. I haven't looked yet to see how flexible they've made that, if it's something that you can leverage outside of Storybook. But yeah, the way that I would recommend it right now is that ability to play with those things live in your component library, so it lives in Storybook. Theme UI, obviously within Gatsby, does have hot reloading, so when you're playing with things in Theme UI, it's hot reloading your site. We saw that earlier in this, but I do know what you're asking, and that this is a really intriguing topic to me, but I don't have a direct answer to it. I think I would like to, the best answer I can say in Emulsify is that I'm interested in bringing this into the style guide environment, similar to what they've done in 6.0 with docs, where you can show a button, but you can is and what the text is, and it's really neat functionality. And it would be neat in a style guide. The style guide, though, I will say, is usually more determined. It's usually a place that codifies something. So there's the component library, which is kind of the playground. The style guide, I would like to see this functionality in it just because I'm interested in it. But I can imagine a lot of clients from the feedback that we've gotten saying, we just need to put the authoritative documentation on what a button does and where it should be used and how it should be used. Don't let them play with all of this. But that, again, that's like specific to the brand that you're working with.
All right. So Carlos has another question. He says he's been using the old Emulsify, the Pattern Lab based one for some projects. So that's good because in the end, it's just twig files. Is there a quick overview you could do on the new version? Maybe just some quick similarities or differences.
Sure. So yeah, Emulsify, the new version is actually larger than just that project. So the new version of that project is called Emulsify Drupal, because now we have the style guide, we have a WordPress project, we have a React starter, we have a multiple examples. The new place to find all of Emulsify is github.com/emulsify-ds. And I can throw that in this chat when we're done. But you'll see there's a number of repos now. But the one that you're talking about is Emulsify Drupal, and it still is the same. You still write Twig files. There is a Twig engine that's different because we're using Storybook now instead of Pattern Lab. But really the change should be, what we were looking for was as much one-to-one as possible, so that we're really able to change the tooling to something we felt like was stronger, but we're not changing the way that we write Twig, or even the way that we write Sass or CSS. Those things remain the same. There are new things that come with Storybook. Storybook requires you to write the things that go into it, whereas Pattern Lab just assumed everything in this folder, except for things, namespaced a certain way, get thrown in. In Storybook, you write your stories files. So that's the biggest difference if you're converting. We actually do in our docs.emulsify.info, we have a section on upgrading from the old version, which I would recommend, by the way, because we're not supporting the old version at all. We're moving forward. If someone in the community wants to step up and take it, that's fine, but we are moving to supporting, we have already moved to supporting just the new one.
All right. Thanks so much, Evan. Excellent talk.